Hey, Earthkeepers. I'm supposing that a lot of us are aware of the environmental challenges that are particular to the places where we live. But if you're like me, it can feel pretty overwhelming at times to think about how we might actually do something about them. Well, in this episode, we'll be talking to someone who took the risk to step up and step out to see if she could take a stand for an endangered population of orca whales. Even though she isn't an environmental scientist or the author of a book or an elected official, in fact, Jennifer Godfrey is a professional musician with the Seattle Symphony who, as an ordinary citizen, decided to use her voice to advocate for orca whales in the Puget Sound. As you'll hear in her story, it's been a wild ride, but she has no regrets and continues her fight for the rights of whales and trees even today. I think you're going to find inspiration in this episode. And maybe as you listen, ask yourself, what are the particular environmental issues in my ecological context that move me? And is it possible that I could actually be part of the solution? Or to put it differently, what is my role in the family of creation where I live? And what would it mean for me to be a good relative? Welcome to the Earthkeepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life, and for many in the Earthkeepers community, that includes our spiritual lives. Welcome, friends, to the Earthkeepers podcast. Jennifer, thank you so much for taking time to be on the podcast. I am really inspired by your story, and I hope that our listeners will be as well. But before we get into the things that you are advocating for and activities you're involved in most recently, maybe you could tell us a bit about you, about your relationship to the place where you live and what you're doing these days with your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I moved to the Seattle area in 1999 to play with the Seattle Symphony. And one of the first things I saw when I moved here was the old-growth rainforest out on the Olympic Peninsula. Seeing the clear cuts juxtaposed to the rainforest was incredibly moving. The impact was so powerful. And one of the other first things that I met in the Puget Sound area were the southern resident killer whales on a whale watching boat. And it was really powerful to see them sending the babies away to safety. And I really felt like I had this bonding experience with them that was just unforgettable.
So my hope in having you on the Earthkeepers podcast is that our listeners from all over the world can find inspiration in your work on behalf of orcas and really on behalf of the broader ecological health of the region. And I'm wondering if you could just give us an introduction to what you've called the Orca Appeal. What's the core problem that you're addressing, and what's the solution that you've been mobilizing people around?
So last April 2024, I came across an environmental impact statement for the One Seattle Plan, which is the comprehensive plan which will control how Seattle develops the land for the next 20 years. And in this environmental impact statement, there was no mention of orcas or killer whales. And they're critically endangered. We have the only population of endangered orcas in the world in Puget Sound. So I started asking questions, how could this be? Am I missing something? And I wasn't getting a lot of answers that satisfied me. And the city was not answering favorably. So the city, when they want to propose a land action like this, they have to write an environmental impact statement, which will identify impacts to the land and the endangered species, and also identify mitigation strategies to reduce some of those impacts. So eventually a friend explained that, NOAA has a Southern Resident Killer Whale Recovery Plan. And it says that areas of highest population on Puget Sound should be reducing their polluted runoff. And I thought that's very surprising that the city has left out endangered species completely, yet there's this recovery plan on the federal level. And wouldn't they want to align with that? We had hoped that maybe if we could just point that out, it would resolve things, but they're only guidelines from NOAA. Eventually, Joe Olson pointed out that there was an appeal process. And that's when the light bulb went off for me that the southern resident killer whales deserve a seat at the table. And if I can give them that place, I will. I don't know what comes next, but I felt this needs to happen. However it happens, they need to be there. So I filed the appeal. I was trying to gather data. I like to understand problems before I take them on, and I wasn't really getting very far. People were busy, and so I was actually on a work break listening to youth orchestra kids playing a rehearsal, and it was 20 minutes before the deadline. My phone had 13% battery left, and I filed the appeal. I was trying desperately to remember everything that I needed to write. I didn't have any notes. I made it. I got it filed. I wrote it in about 3 minutes, and that was the beginning of the Orca Appeal. And the thing that was quite moving is the number of people that came out of the woodwork to support it, like scientists, amazing legal counselors, longtime public interest attorney, found me and offered to help just because they wanted to support a purely environmental appeal. It's focused on southern resident killer whales because as they radically increase tree removals, trees are providing ecosystem services such as reducing stormwater runoff in pretty high volumes. Also in the EIS, they did not include the mitigation strategy or even the amount of stormwater created by these significantly higher tree removals. And as far as the orcas are concerned, I think it's important for people to know that stormwater comes through a lot of drains all across the city, and a lot of it doesn't get treated. Some of it goes to the treatment plant, some of it doesn't. And even the most sophisticated stormwater treatment facilities in Seattle can't remove all the toxic chemicals. However, it's been proven study after study that trees not only reduce the amount of stormwater, they can pull out toxic chemicals that these plants can't.
Your appeal specifically focuses on preserving trees. But, someone who doesn't have knowledge of the issues might just say, well, hey, we'll plant more trees and that'll solve the problem. But that doesn't solve the problem, does it?
Well, yes and no. I do support the planting of new trees. However, what the city is suggesting is a large-scale clear cut, which would leave no large trees. And large trees absorb stormwater at an exponentially higher rate than saplings. A 30-inch Douglas fir absorbs 5,468 gallons of stormwater annually, whereas a 3-inch, which is the common replanting size, only absorbs 296 a year. And when you think about how long it takes for a 3-inch to turn into a 30-inch, that's a pretty long gap in stormwater services, which is about, on average, a minimum of 25 years.
Now, you would think that Seattle, which you would imagine is an eco-minded community, would take into consideration all elements of ecology and that they'd be really open to having that brought up as something that maybe they missed in planning documents. But at least from my end, I'm also aware that Seattle as a city is under a lot of pressure to increase housing. And so more and more people need affordable housing in the city. And it makes me wonder if there are other pressures that are causing Seattle to maybe take shortcuts and not do all the proper vetting and analysis that they need to do when they're talking about development. What's your sense of why the city would not take into consideration the health of the larger ecosystem when they're talking about future planning?
It's a great question. I think about that a lot myself. I would love to understand how they came to make the decisions that they made. I would love to have a greater understanding of that. I imagine they are under tremendous pressure from multiple different angles. However, I work with some architects who repeatedly create alternate site designs showing that we can very frequently save most trees without reducing density. So sometimes it's rotating a building 90 degrees. Sometimes it's putting units a little closer together, sharing a wall, which is what the city of Portland ended up doing with their response to the middle housing bill on the state level. They ended up implementing more shared walls and stacked flats, which still give the amount of density needed without sacrificing the ecosystem.
So you've been at this for a long time now, and I know that some of the processes are sensitive. So you can't tell us everything that you're doing, but maybe in a general sense, what actually happens after you file that appeal and pay your fee for it? What are the things that you are doing and that you hope other people will do with you?
Well, I've had to spend a lot of time learning a lot about many subjects that I didn't formerly understand, and talking to lots of scientists, lots of professionals in land use to build a greater understanding. And fact checking. I do a lot of fact checking to make sure that I am actually using correct information, like the best available information from scientists. So it's a lot of talking to people, a lot of reading scientific journals.
And recently, you, along with our mutual friend Joe Olson, coordinated an event which was meant to educate the public about these issues. How did that go?
That was really fun. It was really amazing to listen to two phenomenal scientists speak about their work. One of them was Lynn Berry, an amazing scientist, worked with NOAA for quite a long time, wrote the Southern Resident Killer Whale Recovery Plan. That was an amazing moment, when I got to meet her and to hear her speak. She gave an incredible presentation. Also on the program was Jeff Donovan, who is a forest economist, worked for the USDA for a very long time. I believe he's the most published researcher on the human health benefits of urban trees. It was really wonderful to get to hear them present. Mainly, my intention with hosting that event was to make the information accessible, since I don't know what the outcome of my appeal will be. I don't know that we'll be successful, but I do know that people should have access to information. So that's not available to everyone as easily as I would like it to be. And that can hopefully empower them to speak up and advocate for their ecosystem as they choose.
In the 6 years that I've been talking with folks on the Earthkeepers podcast, I found that anyone who, like you, has such a passion for caring for the broader community of creation always has deep rootedness in their relationship to nature. Tell us about that relationship that you have to nature and to the ecologies of your place.
So growing up, I spent a lot of time outdoors, and I was very lucky to grow up near multiple rescue rehab release facilities. So close to my home that we would take field trips there in elementary school. And one of them was a marine mammal rescue rehab release. So we had sea turtles, dolphins, river otters. It was a really amazing place called Clearwater Marine Aquarium. And at the time, it was open to the public, so you can take a tour. And throughout the day, they would have educational shows teaching you, here's why this animal is here. And it would be a really beautiful, inspiring show, but they would weave into it, here's how this animal became unreleasable, and here's how humans are the biggest problem, but also can be the biggest solution. And they would really make it very positive. Here's how we can ensure that these animals don't encounter these problems in the future. And also, I was near an amazing park called Moccasin Lake Park with an amazing ranger named Clifford, who was part of the ranger work program. And I took those classes, and they would teach a lot about native plants, native trees, and what is the human role in protecting them. I feel that influence has stayed with me throughout my life and given me a deeper understanding of the interconnectivity of the natural world. Understanding the context really has made me want to protect the existing trees in Seattle far more, because they're not just a tree. They're home to so many animals. They're cleaning the water, cleaning the air. There was a large western red cedar, I think the Wallingford area. I forget the neighborhood. There's a tree named Luma that people were advocating for. I had this idea to bring a giant painted rendition of the oldest southern resident killer whale to this protest. It was a peaceful protest. And I found a really large piece of cardboard, which I painted, modeled after Ocean's son, L25, who's the matriarch, the oldest living matriarch of the southern residents, to help illustrate it's not just a tree. The tree is cleaning the water for the salmon and ultimately for the orcas as well. Transpiration, infiltration, and interception are the three ways that trees help manage stormwater.
What I really love about your story, a couple of things actually, is I think you, by your example, point out something really important, that it's early influences that can make us into earthkeepers in the long run, right? I mean, because of those talks that you heard or your experiences with the wildlife shaped your concerns and your priorities even at that early age. So even though you're committed to music as a career, you're still also committed to advocating for the environment. And I think that really speaks to the importance of early influences that we all should think about, just in terms of how we influence younger generations. But I also love the fact that you painted a killer whale and brought that to the protest to try to save that old growth tree, because it also suggests to me the power of art, the power of creative thinking to bring issues into public awareness, to find ways to creatively fight for creation. So I love that story. And of course, you are at heart an artist. And oftentimes people will assume that they can't have any impact given their chosen career or their capacities, that unless they're a scientist or unless they're in government, how could they make a difference? That's the assumption that a lot of people make, unfortunately. But your life shows, I think, that anything is possible, that you've got to take what you have and use it. You've got to start where you are and do something from that point. I mean, you aren't in government. You don't have an official position of power, yet clearly you believe that you can make a difference. And I wonder, how did you find really the vision and courage to challenge the city government? Why you?
Well, I guess I didn't really see it as challenging the city. I just saw it as giving the Southern residents a seat at the table. I really felt that they deserved a place.
What has been the response to your efforts? And again, I know that you are limited with what you can share because the process is ongoing. But maybe talk about some of the positive responses that you've got from the community, from individuals so far.
It's been very moving to see so many people come forward wanting to help, or some people, complete strangers. And scientists have found me through the internet wanting to help. Some of them wanted to file their own appeal, but didn't. They wanted to, so they've actually joined the fight. Some of them have joined the expert witness list.
And I would imagine that just day to day, when you tell people what you're doing, I'm guessing that in the Seattle area, you get a lot of enthusiastic response and encouragement.
We do. Like when I'm out tabling, it's really rewarding to hear. And the other thing that's can be sometimes surprising, though, is how many people don't know about the appeal. And then when they find out about it, they're shocked about the situation. They just assume that the city would include endangered species, especially ones that they make a lot of tourism money off of.
Yeah, I have to admit that until I heard about your appeal, I had assumed the same thing. Yeah. You mentioned tabling. What is tabling?
Oh, recently at Streamfest for the Snow King Watershed Council, we were invited to have a table at the festival. I mean, groups had a table, and it was really rewarding to get to speak to members of the public and share what's going on and provide them information and see what they do with it.
It sounds like right now, a great part of your work is about increasing awareness, is about educating the public.
Yeah, I started doing flash mobs. So the orca painting that I made, I ended up making 8 of them total, all different Southern resident killer whale members, and I have taken them out into the public. Very recently, we took them into the water, which I've never done before. I woke up one morning realizing they should be in the water to illustrate that if we don't act soon to help them, all we may have left are paintings and photos and recordings. And so I got a group of 8 people to go out in the water with me. We didn't put them in the water because they're paintings, but we stood behind them and they bore the message, help save baby orcas, trees filter toxic runoff. That was really fun. And we got quite a crowd cheering us on and thanking us for the presentation.
What you're talking about is fundamentally creative thinking, thinking outside of the box in terms of what you can actually do, especially as an artistic person, to influence policy in favor of the environment. So I just love that creativity.
I would love to add, the paintings are made exclusively with only reclaimed materials, non-toxic, water-based paints, all reclaimed.
Right. And, you know, in terms of the people watching you, no one knows that. You know it, so it's important to you. But I would imagine that it also provides a way into conversation, that you can use the fact that you've created these pieces of art in a sustainable way. It gives you a way to tell people even more about what's important in terms of our practices day to day. Well, I would guess that with all the public support that you've received, you might also have had some opposition. When we think about resisting the things that we think are wrong in favor of creation, we ought to expect opposition because sometimes the messages that we want to communicate maybe threaten other interests or make people uncomfortable. Have you had to deal with any negative responses from people?
There has been some opposition. Some of it, I believe, was a bit of an intimidation tactic. However, it's not working. One publication put me on a headline saying that I was standing in the way of Seattle getting affordable housing. And when I asked them to consider taking my place of work off of the headline, they adamantly refused.
But still you press on. In some ways, opposition can actually help us to know we're on the right track and even motivate us to push even harder with what we're advocating for.
Yes. In fact, one of the tactics the people opposing chose was to create fake programs for an event that I hosted. And when I spoke with some of the presenters about it, that's exactly what they said. They said, congratulations, you're really onto something. Some people are going to that much effort to spread disinformation. It means you're on the right track.
You've been at the Orca Appeal work for quite a while. And at this point, I'm wondering, do you really believe that you might make a difference in the long run?
That's an interesting question. I'm not really thinking about what the outcome will be. I'm just grateful for the opportunity to help them, regardless of what ends up happening. And hopefully along the way, we can empower people with information to speak it in their own words and maybe take some action of their own. City council needs to hear from people. Their job is to represent the city and their constituents. So the ones they're hearing from are who they will most likely represent.
You know what I really appreciate about your response is you look at the work you're doing as an opportunity and you deliberately don't focus on the outcome. And in the podcast, through all the conversations we've had, we've come to define hope in that way. Hope isn't a sort of idealistic assumption that in the end we'll achieve what we set out to do. Hope instead has become defined as simply doing the right thing that you know is right in the moment and letting the results go in some ways. You want to hope that things will change, but that's not what determines whether or not you do the work, whether or not you take a stand, whether or not you advocate, whether or not you work for the health of the environment. We just have to do it because it's the right thing. Does that resonate with you?
Definitely. Definitely. The more I learn about the southern resident killer whales and their situation, there's only 73 of them, possibly 74. That's a very low number. And the infant mortality rate is quite high. So to me, it feels like the only option is to help them however I can. They're an incredibly beautiful species. They don't interbreed with other orcas. So genetic diversity is a big problem when the population goes below 100. So my stance is when they're already in such a difficult situation, why would we add more obstacles for them? And if the city can, they have other options. But it's a difficult argument because the opposition have a lot of money and they've got lobbyists spreading what I believe to be false. We can save trees within the city. It's good for human health. It's good for the ecosystem.
Our listeners around the world probably have some sense of the particular ecological crises that are unique to their places. And honestly, those challenges can seem overwhelming because they maybe just seem too intractable to be solved by people who don't have obvious power or influence. You obviously don't believe in those limitations. So what I want to ask you is, what would you say to our listeners who maybe feel powerless to enact change for the good of their communities, both the human and more than human members of those communities?
That's a great question. Volunteering with groups that share some of your interests can be really helpful. Meeting like-minded people can really open lots of doors. I would say keep looking and keep feeling and talking to people and learning, because I felt that frustration for many, many years. Not being in science, I felt that I was not doing enough to help. But then it turns out there was a way for me to help.
And do you really believe that anyone can do this?
Yes, absolutely. I did have to face some of my own limitations coming into this, since I'm not someone that seeks out public attention. I don't crave the spotlight. I am horrified of public speaking. I get really nervous. But one of the things that's gotten me through that is just thinking about the reality of life for the southern resident killer whales. And my temporary nervousness is nothing compared to what they encounter in daily life. I've seen so many people do so many amazing things unexpectedly, things that they didn't know they could do, surpassing their own expectations and perceived limitations. I never thought that I would be able to help this way.
So that was Jennifer Godfrey, an ordinary person like the rest of us, who chooses to believe that she can give a voice to orcas where their voices are being ignored. You can learn more about her ongoing work at orcaappeal.org or in this episode's show notes. More to the point, I hope that hearing her story moves you to give some deliberate thought to the particular environmental needs around you in your place, wherever you are in the world. Seriously, in this moment, try to recall at least one ecological issue in your community or region. And if you can't think of one, maybe think about how you could find out what those local issues are. Also, as you go about your week, maybe give some thought to the question, are there ways that I could take action to be the change that is needed? Could I somehow get others in my community to stand with me to make a difference? Maybe for some of us, the most important question is, when it comes to taking the risk to stand for creation, what are the limiting beliefs or controlling fears or false assumptions that hold me back? You know, maybe you're convinced that in yourself, you are not enough to solve the ecological problems around you. But maybe solving the problems should not be the main focus. Instead, maybe what matters is just doing what we know to be the right thing. What matters is finding the courage to step up and do something. Just because, as good relatives in the family of creation, our deep calling is to take care of our more than human brothers and sisters. Love is action, friends. Love is action. And hey, if you decide to take on an issue where you live, please tell me how it's going for you. You can send an email, or better yet, record something on your phone and email the sound file to earthkeepers@circlewood.online. Earthkeepers Podcast is a production of Circlewood, an organization that encourages people to pursue a more ecologically conscious faith. Our executive producer is James Amadon, and our sound engineer is Dave Olfers. Jocelyn Gentry is our communications manager, and Forrest Reed and Levin Poltavsky are the composers of our original music. I am Forrest Tinsley, your podcast host, and I'm really grateful for the time you spent listening to this episode. If you would, help us expand our reach by following or subscribing to this podcast on your favorite listening platform. And be sure to go to our website to sign up for a podcast newsletter. If you know someone who would benefit from hearing this podcast conversation, it would be great if you could send them a link. In any case, I hope you'll join us again for our next episode of the Earthkeepers Podcast.